Internet works, we're good.
Awesome.
I just need you to remind me of your name.
My name is Matt Rebus.
Okay.
I'm in section, is it 201? Yeah.
I think it's
201? Awesome. Tip of the tongue, the people lips.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
This is the worst possible time for Blackboard to be giving me problems.
Oh my gosh. I know that. Yeah, I think it's the best possible time, honestly. If you guys want one of these little,
He's like, in this cap?
it looks important, you know? It's like your one page. I'm gonna have it on mine like this.
All right, I got it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Is everybody having a good morning?
Yeah.
Yeah? You guys seem pretty tired. Stellar, awesome, okay. So let's go ahead and take a little history lesson. So the Civil War was a huge part of American history. And during the years of 1861 through 1865, the Confederate South fought against the Union, which consisted of most northern states. So, on April 9th of 1865, the Confederacy fell to the Union, and the Union's victory ensured the abolishment of racial slavery. As time progressed, the aging Confederate veterans were in need of financial support, whether that be like ceremonial services, housing services, or their other needs. And at this time, Social Security was not a thing until 1934. So these veterans, they got help from organizations. Some of these organizations, such as the Daughters of the Confederacy, who aside from assisting veterans, also engaged in activities such as encouraging schools to use books that romanticize the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. And that's according to Karen Cox, a leading scholar on the subject. So, in 1918, the Daughters of the Confederacy erected a monument in dedication to the fallen Confederate soldiers. And this 12-foot monument presents a man in traditional Confederate uniform holding a rifle. And the monument is located on the south side of the Denton courthouse, and you guys can see it if you ever go. I'm sure you've seen it before. So this monument is symbolic of Southern pride, and to the Daughters of the Confederacy, the monument was symbolic of preserving Southern views and remembering the Confederate cause and tradition of antebellum South, so before the war. The tradition of the monument refers to as slavery and white supremacy. Okay. The monument was built with 2 water fountains, however, in 1918, during this time was like the Jim Crow time era, and no one can drink from these fountains but white people, not Native Americans, not blacks, and not Mexicans. And due to this, the statue has become more of a controversy than it has been a memorial. Okay, so the controversy has built over the last decade, and an increasing amount of people are advocating for its removal. And after much research, we have concluded that the statue should be removed from the courthouse entirely because it gives off the wrong impression to visitors. The monument misrepresents Denton as a prejudiced community because it is common knowledge that a community's courthouse represents its values on justice and equality. Yet, in 2015, we still hold a horrific display of injustice on our court's lawn. It is apparent by the years of protest and vandalism, and it is clear that the citizens of Denton want the monument removed from the courthouse. I urge you to reflect on this unbalanced moral issue and realize that the only way to end the current racial issues is to progress and to be virtuous in your decisions. We are all aware of the rising racial tension in America right now, such as the Black Rights movements and so on. So amidst the unrest, the acts of removing the monument now would speak louder than any other time in the future. And not only would it be a huge symbolic step in the right direction, but it would make the square more welcoming to Denton visitors and members of the Denton community. However, if we were to do nothing at all and leave the monument where it stands, the protest will continue, and more than likely it will continue to be vandalized, which costs the city more and more money to clean it up. And this makes us question where the city of Denton stands on racial matters. Are we trying to preserve these unethical Southern views and traditions? Because that is what the intentions were when the monument was initially erected in 1918. The Confederacy lost the war, and the continuation of the Confederacy's traditions would be unconstitutional. This controversy has stirred up tension among many Dentonites, and the people have protested the monument's removal countlessly. Because having this monument on government land, and especially in front of the Denton courthouse, is giving off wrong impression to newcomers and even people that call Denton home. The homepage of change.org states that the solution is to take away the power of this racist symbol while maximizing its teaching values. So me and my group want to stress the importance of this monument being removed from the square, or at least relocated inside a historical museum with context of Civil War so that it is viewed the way it should be, as history. That is everything.
Alright, so do I go up to the podium for questioning?
Yes. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
No, you can go up, but
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
No, I need your name.
Oh, Mackenzie Rudd?
Okay, thanks.
Oh, what's your name again? I forgot.
Matt Rivas.
Okay.
Alright, good when you are.
Alright, so, Mr. Rivas, first things first, I want to ask you a question. During the speech, you were saying that you were speaking on behalf of the majority of the citizens of Denton, that you were saying the people of Denton wanted the statue gone.
Yes.
What I'm going to ask is, how exactly do you know that? To our knowledge, according to all our research, there have been no official polls taken to determine how many people want it gone, how many people want it to stay, how many people are indifferent. How do you know you're not acting against a clear majority?
Am I allowed to? Okay. So this past June, there was protesters standing outside this monument, and it's happened before countlessly. There's been multiple protests, and the statue itself has actually been vandalized twice. One being this past summer, and it was vandalized saying, "This is racist." So, I mean, like, clearly people are out there. If they want it removed, like, it wouldn't be an issue.
Well, they're outraged, yeah, but are they the majority? Yes or no?
I believe so.
All right, if you say so. Also, I have another question for you. At one point, you said during your speech that having the statue on the courthouse square was unconstitutional.
Yes.
Which specific amendment are you referring to? Because to my knowledge, there are no amendments of the Constitution that state that monuments to wars such as the Civil War, regardless of either side, are banned from public property or what have you. Which specific amendment are you talking about?
I think the abolishment of segregation.
But does that mention monuments anywhere in it?
It doesn't, but the monument itself is has the 2 water fountains, which is kind of symbolic of the segregation.
If you say so. Okay, also, which museum do you think it should be relocated to? Do you think that there are any appropriate venues to house a statue like that?
Yes, the Confederate Museum in Denton.
Okay, and do you know if the city of Denton has enough money to actually do so?
If they have the money to clean off the monument countless times, then I'm sure they have enough money to relocate it.
You do realize that it's a state-protected archaeological monument, right? And that doing so would run afoul of the State Antiquities Code.
I've never heard of the Antiquities Code. However...
There you have it.
Yeah?
Is that it?
I think so. Is that everything? Do you have any more questions?
I have some more.
Okay.
How much do you know? How much do you think this would cost in time and labor?
Well, I did not do the research to know exactly how much it would cost. However, I know it would be a lot more efficient to relocate it and then be done with it versus continually having to put effort in to stop the protesters, to combat the people that are protesting against it, and to clean up the vandalism.
What, the whole 2 times it's happened?
Well, the protests have happened multiple. It's been vandalized twice.
Exactly.
However,
2
that
times.
past time was this past June, and with the current racial tension in America, I'm sure it's going to continue.
How do you know it's not going to cost hundreds of thousands to move it? Oh. That's it for me. Actually, not really. I have a speech coming up. All right.
Give me a couple minutes.
Whenever you're ready. All right. If we may play rebel's advocate, I'm sorry. We fully understand that the issue of moving the Confederate statue in town square strikes an emotional chord with many members of the community on every side of the issue, pro, against, or ambivalent. We fully understand the ethical implications of letting such a statue memorializing Confederate soldiers stay on public land, as well as the ethical implications of putting it in a museum. It may have represented one thing back in 1918. What message does it send nowadays? We've carefully looked over both sides of the argument about what the memorial represents for better and for worse, and during our research we came to the realization that not only would moving the memorial be a bad idea, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to actually do. All in all, trying to move the Confederate Memorial in Denton Courthouse Square would be a bad idea for multiple reasons. It's infeasible, it's impractical, and it carries some unfortunate ethical implications. First of all, it should be noted that the statue is a state and national historic landmark as well as a state archaeological landmark. That means that any attempt to remove or relocate the statue would require official approval on both state and federal levels. In addition, because it's an archaeological landmark, relocating it will invoke legal issues, since such a move is guaranteed to run afoul of the Antiquities Code of Texas, which states that, quoted, landmarks under sections 101.091 or 101.092 of this code are the sole property of the state of Texas and may not be removed, altered, damaged, destroyed, salvaged, or excavated without a contract with or with permit from the committee. In other words, you can only move the statue if you have a permit permitting you to do so. Why not just get a permit? The Texas Antiquities Committee will only issue a permit, quote, if it is the opinion of the committee that the permit is in the best interest of the state of Texas. And since this has been attempted multiple times since 1991 without success, such a possibility is highly unlikely to happen anytime soon. In addition, one must factor in the actual moving process itself, which by its very nature would have to be subsidized by the city of Denton. Equipment costs, labor costs, insurance costs, legal fees, litigation, and all. Does the city of Denton even have the kind of capital it would take to go through such an undertaking? I mean, what other options are worthy of a memorial? It seems like the two options here are either to go through the time, expense, legal rigmarole, and red tape involved in moving the statue, assuming it's even possible, or simply having it stay where it stayed for almost a century and letting the money be spent on other more pressing matters. On that note, we maintain that the memorial can't be transported to another appropriate location. The act of moving a memorial to fallen soldiers to a museum is extremely unorthodox, if not downright unethical, and such an act is almost never carried out unless under exceptional circumstances, according to our research. People in this community who lost ancestors fighting for the Confederacy would not be able to see the memorial as readily due to the fact that the nearest museum that could theoretically contain such a memorial would be the Texas Civil War Museum in Fort Worth. Knowing this, we reached out and directly contacted their executive director, Cindy Harriman, asking if her museum would take such a monument. In response, she told us that if museums have outdoor spaces, yes, they would kind of be a candidate to take things. Would we take the Denton County monument? Well, we're not really in Denton County, so we would really have to think about it. As opposed to having the monument destroyed, every museum would look at it, but would have to fit into what they normally have in a museum. You can't take these things and put them inside unless they have a lot of money to do it, because of the work that would have to be done into the museum to hold it. In other words, the nearest museum to Denton that might take it in theory ended up rejecting it outright. And honestly, judging by her reaction, how many museum directors do you think there are in the state that would be willing to be able to spend the time and money it would take to accommodate it? It should also be noted that the statue was erected specifically to honor this residents of Denton who never came back to the war, from the war. It has a tie to the heart of the city's history, and relocated would carry grave implications for the families of the deceased. Denton's Confederate memorial is, for better or worse, a part of our history, and a reflection of the lives the community lost during the most brutal war in our nation's history. And moving a memorial away from the community it's addressing is nothing short of whitewashing history. As we all know, historical revisionism is a nasty habit to get into, no matter who you are. All in all, as complicated as this issue may be, by this point it should be self-evident that moving the statue is not an issue worth pursuing, regardless of which side of the fence you're on. The mere concept of moving a memorial to dead soldiers from a public space museum has enough ethical implications on its own. But the issue goes well beyond the issues of morality and also entails issues of practicality and even possibility. Assuming you do successfully obtain permission to move the statue and finding a suitable museum to do so, which we've established would be an extremely improbable fool's errand, moving the museum memorial would be a quagmire of red tape and lost money. And knowing just how efficiently our state and federal governments operate, assuming they are willing to let the memorial be moved, it would almost certainly take years and leave a dent in the city of Denton's taxpayers. Times and values may have changed. But as George Santayana once said, those who cannot remember history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you. Any questions?
Well, yeah, I gotta get my grade.
Good point.
What's your name?
Dominique Austin. What's your name again?
Kinsey Ride.
Good speech.
Tell them
Oh, sorry. Terrible speech.
We won.
I didn't say it was right, I just said it was good.
He's like, don't tell him.
Okay, Mackenzie, I know earlier when you were asking questions, you had asked Matt about who the majority is. You also stated in your speech that there has been multiple times where many members of the community have argued this monument. Who are these many members?
The only incidents I could think of were two specific incidents in which I couldn't find exactly who it was. One was in 1991 and one was in 2008. So the answer is, people out there were doing it. Problem is, I could not figure out who exactly those people were because they were just court cases, basically.
Okay, so basically you don't know who the many members are that you stated?
No.
Okay. Okay, and so you also stated that there have been, these same members have, well, they've tried to pass this petition several times, and you're saying that it's a requirement to have multiple members pass the petition in order for it to get covered by the Texas.
That's not really what I said, though.
Okay,
What I said was that you have to submit it to the committee, that is the State Antiquities Commission, in order
Right.
to remove it. And every time this issue has been brought up, to my knowledge, they've always said no, every time.
All right.
And the museum director he spoke with, I didn't have enough time to include it, but she basically said, don't hold out hope that they would ever change their minds about the subject. She made it pretty clear that the prospect of getting them to agree with something like this is pretty bleak.
Okay. For the majority of your speech, it seemed that the main issue for you all is just the money of removing it. My issue is, what is the monument honoring really at the end of the day? Like, what are you guys trying to honor?
There was a part of the speech that I had to cut for time where I actually addressed that specifically. And what it's addressing nowadays, there was a new plaque erected next to the original text stating that this doesn't have to honor racism or racial hierarchy or pecking orders. It's honoring people who died fighting for a cause, who had families at home they never got to come back to, and people who came back alive with physical or mental scars that would stay with them for their lives. It's a memorial to dead soldiers, basically. We don't have to associate it with racism because even the text doesn't say racism is good or the South is good. All it says is for the people in war who never came back.
Okay. And as far as like the history of the monument, you know, we both did a lot of research on it, but for an average citizen walking past that monument, how are they going to know what it once represented and the progression that we have made if that's not there? If it's supposed to be honor or pay homage to what has happened in our past, if they're not able to see that, how are they gonna know the history behind those fountains?
It's a good point, but I will say that there is a way they can see, because there are two plaques there. One was a text written in 1918, chiseled into the side of the actual monument itself. Another was erected at a much later date, which says, if I can find it here, oh, never mind.
Okay. Is that next?
Yeah. I'm Payman Haghighi.
Sorry, how do you spell your last name?
Haghighi.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to address a couple arguments, or I guess claims stated by the opposing side. So in the first speech, some points that were made, when looking at some reasons of why you would move a memorial, why you would take action, there's the economical side of it, there's the logistical side of things, and I guess it's the message that you think the monument or something in something of that sort would send. And so the first thing I would like to talk about is the economical side of the issue. Now, some of the claims made were that it, due to the only 2 times it was vandalized, that this moving the monument would cost less than dealing with spray paint, which is really not that much money to get rid of, as opposed to destroying the grand memorial, just taking it somewhere else. And actually, a quote from Cindy Herron, she is the executive director at the Texas Civil War Museum in Fort Worth. She stated that because this monument is protected, and it's, the courthouse site is basically a Texas archaeological site, that removing the monument or taking it down by the county of Denton, the city of Denton, would impose a fine of $1,000 per day until the Confederate statue was replaced. So in other words, in the number of signatures, the petition that is circulating for the removal, it would basically be ignored by the county of Denton. It costs a lot more money to move one of these things. And she explained that in order for it to have a spot in the museum, Denton taxpayers would have to pay money coming out of our tax dollars, when it's a lot easier for the city of Denton to get rid of some simple spray paint. This happens on schools, on high schools, colleges, campuses every day. This is not a problem. At least not a bigger problem, as opposed to paying thousands of dollars, or it could go up to $100,000 to ultimately get it removed. In one of the examples, when you look at what it stands for, when we were talking to her, she explained that around 90,000 people died during this war, and they didn't get a proper memorial, they didn't get a proper burial, they didn't get to say their final goodbyes. So this stands basically as a memorial for those people who didn't get to come back home. As Matt was talking about, this, the message here, they have a headstone next to it explaining this doesn't stand for racism. This is not what this is meant for. Just like a World War II memorial, a Vietnam memorial, this is meant to commemorate people's lives lost, the families that didn't get to say goodbye to the people they lost in war. And taking that away is taking away basically all the people know their ancestors, and all they have left to say that they never got to say. Now, you look at it logistically, like I said, moving this monument, it just doesn't make sense for us to break down, tear down. And when you look at it logically, it only makes sense if a majority of the city, felt like this needs to be moved. Now, a few protests, a couple cases of people vandalizing property, that doesn't serve as the majority, because there have not been any official polls that would indicate that a majority wants this to be removed. Not the opposing side had any numbers to explain, this amount of people wanted it removed. There's this petition, this petition, this petition. There's these examples of, a large majority, a large segment of Denton's population that wants this memorial removed. Then it would, make a lot more sense to, from that point go on to, approach the Denton County about the situation. But like Max stated in the argument, this goes to a committee, and they've been, very strong on their stance in saying, it's not feasible, it's not economically, doesn't make sense for us. There's no majority that indicates that we should remove this, and because of that, every time it's brought up, they say the same thing every single time, and it's like, it just doesn't make sense for us to move it. There's a few protests, and personally, I grew up in Denton. I've been here for 20 years of my life, and I've never seen any protest until last summer. That's the first time I personally, seen any protests, and anyone who's grown up in Denton can say the same thing. Now, and that's coming from a personal standpoint, but from the standpoint of other people who, they're looking at this, from other aspects of it, they just don't see how it makes more sense to move a monument like this. That they feel all it does is, commemorate lives. For the last 20 years I've known, that I've been here, other people, even the people on the committee, they see this as a memorial. They see this no different as any other memorial commemorating lives that are lost. These people, they die in war, and they don't feel that 90,000 lives are. It's disrespectful. And as Max stated before, in order for us to not repeat history, it's important for us to honor history. It's not the message that it sends, the message that some people want to interpret it and redefine the statue to indicate racism, and that's just reducing the memorial to a trying to interpret it to a level of absurdity that just really doesn't exist in the situation. And we feel that keeping the monument there, it makes a lot more sense than getting it removed.
My name is Lindsay King. So the first thing that I want to bring up is you were putting a lot of emphasis on the economic and logistical challenges that come with removing the statue. You were really making it out to seem like it would be near impossible. Are you aware that in Oklahoma the Denton statue was removed for only $5,000?
Yeah, there was a memorial actually in New Orleans, and it, man was trying to remove it for $125,000. So these situations really vary, and it's important to weigh up how the community sees it. A majority wanted the memorial removed in Oklahoma as opposed to in Denton. There's no indication that a majority of the citizens want to remove. So in that case, there's certain situations where money would really vary depending on the situation, or even if the majority wanted to remove it in the first place.
Right, and then, so you're saying that we don't know that the majority wants it removed. You also said that there were only a few protests. You said a few protests twice. However, there have been protests since the 1990s from the NAACP. So I was just wondering, how do you consider that a few protests when it's been going on for 15 years?
And I mentioned, I've lived here my entire life for the last 20 years. Visited the square, recently, and there's not, to my knowledge, there's never been any, protests where it's big enough to the point, one person can always protest something. That's and I respect that. It happens at UNT every single day. But on a scale large enough for the state to, pay thousands of dollars to get something removed, that would have to happen on a large scale. Now, I haven't personally seen in the 20 years of me living here that I've actually seen something on the magnitude. Although they have increased in the past, it's still not on a level that would, make it economically, make sense for it economically for us to get rid of something like this. And the protests haven't gone to the point that would make sense in that regard.
Okay, and you also said that if we were to remove the statue, it would be reducing it to, or interpreting it at a level of absurdity. Are you saying that our history of slavery wasn't already absurd enough?
No, so the way I'm explaining the situation is that when you look at it, when the way the state wants it to be interpreted, they want it to be interpreted commemorating the lives. 90,000 lives lost. These people never got to say goodbye to their families. Now when you just take the message and redefine it in a way that, do you want other people to interpret it because that's how you believe, that by definition is taken to a level of absurdity. And I just don't feel like, we don't feel that, that's the message it's representing. So when you redefine something that, the city's saying this is not what this is meant for racism, you're redefining it to something, and in that case, it's redefining something and taking it to a level of absurdity that just, in this case, isn't relevant.
It's not redefining it, though, if you remove it from a place of law and justice, a symbol of great injustice. Wouldn't you agree?
I feel like making your own definition for something that has already been defined, already been debated by the state.
Ronald Evans. Okay. In your constructive speech, you said that moving the monument would be unfeasible and unpractical. This, however, is an opinion and not even true, because people oftentimes move whole things such as houses and other types of property. For example, the building even here at UNT has been moved different times, and that's much bigger than the monument at the square. And so if that can be moved, then the monument can be moved too. You said the monument only represents one thing. That's not true. It represents many things, such as white supremacy, racism, disenfranchisement, etc. And all these beliefs came with it when it was erected in 1918 by the Daughters of Confederacy. And the Daughters of Confederacy put it up with the intent to preserve those beliefs, such as racism, white supremacy, and disenfranchisement. You said that people redefine the monument to their own beliefs, which also isn't true, because it was defined at its erection by the Daughters of Confederacy in 1918 with the beliefs of white supremacy, racism, and other negative concepts. So it's not redefined by anybody. It was defined by the people who put it up to have those beliefs. You said that it was unorthodox and unethical to move. That's also an opinion. You said a museum director said with space in a museum that it is possible to move it, but you said that she's not trying to put it up because she's not in Denton County. However, if she was in Denton County, the likeliness of her putting it in her museum drastically shoots up because she was open to it in the first place. You said it would cost a lot of money for it to be moved in the first place, and this is probably true. It probably wouldn't be free to move. However, the money can be put together by the citizens of Denton who want its removal. Even if it were to take a long time, it could still be done. Also, just because it costs a lot of money to move doesn't mean that that should be the sole reason why it shouldn't be moved. The situation is bigger than money itself. There are many negative beliefs and connotations that are associated with it that need to be gone. A price can't be put on the effect that the monument places on people who feel its negative connotations. You said that it doesn't make much sense at all to remove the monument. However, it makes clear sense because large groups of people in the community of Denton have protested for its removal. It is a preservation of history, the monument standing up where it is. However, it's a preservation of many negative connotations that also come with it that need to be gone. That's it.
Caleb Chache. TROJAC. I get asked that question a lot. So.
Haven't bothered that. You making sure we're all on the same page, what we do on what page?
I'm doing the negative questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, are you an expert in moving houses?
I'm not an expert.
Do you claim to know how much it might cost to move a house?
No, not off the top of my head.
So, just because houses get moved or stuff gets moved every now and then, does that not mean that it could be expensive? Does that mean it's cheap to do?
No, that doesn't mean it's cheap to do, but the money, if the money can be put up to move a house, it can definitely be put up to move a monument.
Okay, and next question is going to be how does the monument exactly represent racism?
Because those were the beliefs that were put up with the Daughters of Confederacy when they placed it.
How do you know that those were their beliefs?
Because that was the research that I did. Yes.
Okay, so where does it say in your research that they put it up for racism?
It was supported by the Ku Klux Klan.
What part was that?
The Daughters of activities such as encouraging schools to use books that romanticize both the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan.
So was that the Denton chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy? And then where's your source on that? Who are you quoting?
That was Karen Cox,
And who's Karen Cox?
a leading scholar on the subject.
Okay, what does that mean though? What is she, was that an online editorial? What website did it come from?
Authors of Dixie's Daughters, yes. She wrote a book, Authors of Dixie's Daughters.
It sounds like a super unbiased book. So how do you know that there were, do you know how many large groups? Like you said that there's a lot of large groups that have been coming together saying
Yes, the
that.
protests that have happened at the monument.
So how many people are large groups?
It's enough to say that it needs to be gone. It wasn't a small group.
How would you define enough though? I said, how would you define enough people? Do you have a certain number of people that are actually?
Enough people for it to be as big as a situation as it is. If it was only 1 or 2 or 3 people, it wouldn't be such a situation. But the fact that it's so big that's in the news, it's definitely enough people to have it moved.
Do you know what the population of UNT is? It's 36,000. Do you know what the population of TW is? It's like 15,000. Do you know how many people went to the last one? 50 people. So I would, yeah.
And where did you get that information?
That was on, what was it? Is it in there? This is question time, so. How do you know?
You like listen to that? This is question time.
I was like, yeah, I didn't know it.
Mimi asked that.
Sounds like an unbiased source.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
You know what's under the table.
You got me.
Hey, that's a good source. That's a good argument. Pat it on the back. He's like, tell him that.
Just got Maggie.
Lindsay, right?
Yes.
You're doing the affirmative defense.
Affirmative defense, yes. So, while the opposing side side has brought up some great arguments. They keep playing with this ad misericordiam situation where they're speaking about how it's just a monument for these men who have died, for their families to remember them. So men have died for terrible causes. Why don't we have statues of, let's say, the military men from the Red River War? That was a Texas tradition that they stole from Indians during that time. They confined them to reservations with inadequate resources. That's history. That's a Southern tradition. Why don't we have a statue of that? It's because it's a terrible part of our past that we don't want to say we're proud of. We have it in a museum for a reason, to contextualize it. Now, I know that you're saying that this is a symbol of lives that are lost, but symbols carry different meanings to different communities. To some community members, this is a symbol of racism. This brings back memories of lynchings, of political disenfranchisement. They don't think of the honorable cause of the Confederate Army when they see this. And as far as visitors go, visitors to Denton, who maybe just see the center of the town courthouse, this really the heart of Denton Square, do we really want a symbol of white supremacy on the lawn of a place of justice? I mean, in our opinion, moving the monument to a different location, it would still preserve the history. It would not make it any less of a memorial. It would just make Denton more welcoming and accepting, and again, put the Civil War into context. And I know that you were concerned about our source of Karen Cox, and just so you know, she wrote the book Dixie's Daughters, which is a scholarly, peer-reviewed book. You can look that up if you'd like. And another thing she researched in her book, she stated that the primary non-political, or that the Daughters of the Confederation were the primary non-political organization that promoted the preservation of the racial status quo. I also want to bring up, because you keep talking about how this is just going to be so inconvenient. Progress should never be held back because of inconveniences. That's just lazy. And it reminds me of a case in 2005. And this is when the Supreme Court ordered the removal of the Ten Commandments statue that was in the Kentucky courthouse. The reason they removed it is because they concluded that it was put there originally with religious purposes in mind. So it doesn't matter the intent behind it now, it mattered the intent behind it when it was put up. The intent behind the statue when it was put up was white supremacy. The Daughters of the Confederation were for the Confederacy. They wanted slavery to keep existing. And this monument is a symbol of that. So I believe that if a certain statue has been protested since the early 1990s by the NAACP, that is plenty cause to say that whether the majority wants it or not, this is a huge, huge symbol in Denton. This is how people are recognizing Denton. And it's not giving us a good reputation. And I agree with what you said. We don't know if the majority wants it. We don't know if the majority doesn't want it. We should find out. But either way, this is a blot on Denton's, this is a blot on Southern history, and it is misrepresenting Denton, especially with it being on the courthouse lawn, which should be a place of justice. Having a symbol of great injustice is just completely inappropriate. And we can remove it. Once we have a petition or proposal, we can forward it to the state. The state would be in communication with the Texas Historical Commission, and then Denton County and the Texas Historical Commission could weigh the impact of removing the statue. So it's not impossible like you guys are making it out to be. And again, progress deserves hard work. That is all I have to say about that. I hope that you will all agree with me in saying we can preserve history without disenfranchising an entire group of Denton's community.
I'll make you laugh.
Debate strategy.
They're laughing, that means we're right.
No, that's our sleepy.
Okay, first we won because we made them laugh. And our opponents did a good job in a sense that they used a very good emotional argument. They tried to entice you emotionally. Some would say it was a pathetic argument because they try to make it seem like it's disenfranchising people and that it's really hurting people's feelings that this monument's there, when we really have no proof that that's actually the case. There haven't been huge rallies. It really didn't even make, I think it made national news once, the being removed on the square. I think it only made national news once. Yeah. So, and then they said moving the monument is feasible, but they haven't even, the first speaker in question period acknowledged that he's never even heard of the antiquities group, and that was what it would be considered. It'd be considered under the antiquities code and the archaeological code, and they said that they've turned it down many times and said that it's not going to be removed, and that it's just not possible. It wouldn't be a good thing to remove it. They also make the claim that it's racist, and I still can't see how it's racist. It's much like a memorial. It's like a World War II memorial or World War I memorial. We have those all the time. And as we know, history is always written by the winner. We have tons of Civil War monuments in the North. And they're trying to take away the few Civil War monuments in the South that are doing the exact same thing. Keeping the memory going of guys that lost their lives, fighting in a battle that they thought at the time was right. And this wasn't exactly a racist battle. It said, I think there's, there was only 70% of people in the South at the time that were actually 70% of the people in the South didn't even own slaves that fought in the war. There was only 30% that had these racist ideas. The next claim they make is that the daughters were racist, the daughters of the Confederacy. And using one book to say that the daughters of the Confederacy is racist is like a terrorist writing a book and then saying all Islamic people are terrorists. I mean, it's basically the same thing. Just because this one person had these racist ideas doesn't mean that all of the daughters had racist ideas, and that's speculation to assume that they all would have these racist ideas. Then they said that the money could be brought together, and I was wondering where they got this information to show that. People hate spending money, hate paying taxes. What makes you think that people are going to want to pay taxes on this, especially when there haven't been that much of a community support for it in the first place? And then the last point, we just simply can't remove it. The Antiquities Court has already turned us down multiple times. It's impossible to be removed. The state courthouse is actually almost seen as a museum because it has the two water fountains. It has the plaques. So these are actually historical monuments and would be treated as if they are already in the museum. Other than what the Confederate Museum in Fort Worth said, and that was the only museum even remotely around that could possibly take that piece. And she said that they would have to pay for it, to have foundation installed and put basically a whole new room onto their museum in order to even consider taking it, that the city of Denton would have to do that. And in New Orleans, for just having those, the Robert E. Lee statue removed, it was going to cost $125,000. So you say this is feasible and this is okay and that we can scrounge up the money, but you didn't really give any evidence to show how we would do that, and it's just not likely to happen. It's really just impossible to move the monument. They had a very nice, pathetic argument. That is it.
Oh, Mag, they go next.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, it's affirmative, then negative.
Are we allowed to ask some questions?
Oh, you took your hat off. That threw me off. I was like,
Who's that guy?
Which do you?
I would first just like to point out that it's not impossible to remove it. As you guys stated before, with petitions from several groups of people, we would be able to remove the monument. So just want to make sure that I point that out. Would we call it just to allow a statue of a Nazi soldier to remain standing? Confederate soldiers fought for dehumanization of blacks just as well as the Nazis fought for the removal and dehumanization of all Jews. But you all believe that this monument is a great representation of our history. Today, Saturday, November 20th, 2015, our country is still fighting a racial war. It can be seen throughout our whole country as citizens come together to protest Black Lives Matter. As innocent citizens like Trayvon Martin from Miami Gardens, Florida, and Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri lose their life due to racial prejudices, the tension between minorities and whites are only growing stronger. We are in a sensitive place, and many minorities feel underrepresented in a country that stands for freedom and equality. The time is now that we as a country decide to make a change and make a stand that racial segregation will no longer control our country. In the spring semester of 1956, the University of North Texas was desegregated and is now one of the most diverse universities in the state. Look at our panel: Black, white, Hispanic, Black. A little over 50 years ago, only one of us would have been able to receive an education here. That would be her, only just in case y'all. This university has been able to bring diversity and change into this community and break down the racial prejudices. Progression. Denton County has come so far from once being a predominantly conservative white town to being the collegiate home for almost every race. The time is now that this community makes a statement. With so much progression, it is essential that we only move forward. Our country is currently in slow regression, and many citizens are angry. When I look at the news and the altercations conspiring around our country, I'm reminded of all the pictures seen in history books of the civil rights era. We must take a stand. It is important that we never forget our history or minimize what has happened in the past, but it must be done under the right circumstances that respects all citizens. Today, we are not asking you all to erase the history of the Confederate soldiers and the service they have given to the South. We are only asking that it be done right. The minorities of this community need to know that Denton is for progression, not regression. The monument can be moved to a museum where it can appropriately honor Confederate soldiers and educate citizens of the racial symbolization. We hope today that we have opened your mind to change and the importance of progression. Thank you.
All right, let me just say, I'm sorry to say this, that was a great speech, I'm not gonna lie. I genuinely think you did a good job. The only issue with that is, that wasn't a summary speech. That's not what it is. We are summarizing what happened in the debate. And that's what I shall do right now. As we started out with a constructive speech. I gave my own speech restating all of the basic tenets and all the points that we made about how moving the statue would be a bad idea because it's impractical, because there are no clear solutions as to how we would get the money and how we would go about doing it, and how the statue doesn't necessarily mean racism to everyone who sees it. Following that, I also... Actually, no, I got that completely wrong. We started with the affirmative speech. Matt over here gave us their basic points about how Denton should be seen as a model of progression and how the Daughters of the Confederacy were a racist organization who erected the monument with racist intentions, and that removing it would be the right thing to do. I came in and I asked him questions cross-examining why he thought this way, and whether or not he was speaking for the majority, and whether or not he had even heard of the Texas Archaeological Code, which he had not. After I gave my constructive speech, if you can remember all the way back towards the beginning of my speech when I stated it, they asked me, how do I know the commission wouldn't approve, and how do I know the statute wouldn't come across as racist to visitors of Denton who aren't familiar with the statute or the code or anything like that. We had a good discussion about that. Unfortunately, it got cut for time. Following that, it was the negative attack speech, saying the statute was only vandalized a few times, moving it would be very expensive, and that the opposing side hadn't brought up any clear solutions, any clear plans on how they would move it, and how it's supposed to memorialize dead soldiers in the same way any other memorial would. So also following that, there were affirmative questions. He asked them, he specified that economic situations vary from state to state, that what's true in Oklahoma may or may not necessarily be true for Louisiana, etc., etc. Affirmative attack. You stated that it is feasible to move it because there have been much bigger undertakings done in the past, that the statute does represent racism to a great deal of people who are from Denton as well as many people without. Organizations such as the NAACP have protested it, which means that there is a strong argument to think that there is significant opposition. After that, there was a negative questioning. You asked, how do you know the questioning wouldn't be expensive? How do you know it represents racism, etc., etc.? We go through the defense. And I don't feel the need to really go through the defense because honestly, all they were doing were restating points they already made. I can't even think of any new points made by either side there. All in all, this was an interesting debate. It was absolutely brutal. No punches were pulled at all. But who do I think prevailed? I think we did, just in terms of structure and how we did it. We gave solid and very concrete evidence. We actually directly contacted an expert in the subject of moving things to museums, which is the crux of the issue, not necessarily the message, but whether or not it should be done. And we flat out said, we stated, that doing so would be not only very, very difficult, if not impossible, because of the issue of having to go through all the rigmarole with the Texas Antiquities Code because it's an archaeological landmark. We also stated how any plans to do so would be moot or otherwise not work because of all the difficulties associated. When we asked you guys whether or not the statute could be moved, you never stated how you could move it. You never gave us a clear plan. You never gave us a clear indication of how to do it. There was a huge reliance on pathos, maybe justifiably so, I would say. But honestly, in this case, the pathos ended up clouding your judgment, and you weren't able to come up with clear solutions to the people present on how exactly you would implement and execute a plan to do what you believe is right. I'm not saying that there's anyone in the right or in the wrong. All I'm here to do is gauge whether or not your points were argued effectively. You argue them passionately. I respect that. I respect your point of view. I completely get what you're trying to get across. But ultimately, in terms of form, I think we have the upper hand. Thank you.
All right. Great work, everybody. Hopefully, I know Dr. Lane expects you to stick around and watch some other debates, so if there are some that pique your interest, you can, I mean, depending on if they've started already, you may or may not be able to go into those rooms, but just be courteous, don't go into any rooms if you're unsure if they've started debating or not.
Okay.
But try to group.
Great job, guys.
All right.
I mean, I'll take this. I don't think I need it.
seconds. How was your debate? So, all the debates are the same, right? Are all the debates the same? Right. So I'll be able to start the camera, put a couple of yeah, I'll get off at 4 today. I get off at 4 today. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just do ours, and it's just the updated.
Hey, y'all did a really good job.
Thank you, you too, bro.
Hey, good job. See you later.
I'll probably stop that.